Hey guys, this is Ian from ARID USA. Today we're going to be going over how to remove a factory trigger and safety from your stock, replace it with one of our units, as well as how to tune and adjust your trigger linkage, with a couple of tips on fitting our parts as well as adjusting the linkage's engagement. So here we have a factory NATO stock. First time my receiver's actually ever seen a NATO stock. This is one that I had laying around as a spare for measurements and stuff. So this is, I just threw my receiver on it real quick for a demonstration. So first thing you're gonna do is you're going to remove the magazine from the rifle. Make sure that there is no mag in the rifle. You're going to grab your charging handle and charge the weapon system. Then you're going to make sure that there is no rounds in the chamber. Make sure your weapon is clear. Okay. Then you're going to take your receiver, pushing it into the stock. You're going to push this takedown latch, open it up, slowly release pressure, and that will allow you to separate your stock from the receiver. Close that latch, put your receiver and bolt carrier grip to the side. I had no bolt carrier grip in my rifle. That was for demonstration purposes. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to push the button on the butt pad. You're going to pull your stock sling swivel out, or if you're using the Corvus unit, you're going to pull that out, move your butt pad, and pull your trigger peg out. Okay, you can set all three of these to the side for right now. They're not necessary. So the factory AUG trigger, you're going to have one screw inside of it. Okay, that is a 7/64 Allen, and this screw holds the linkage in place. So we're going to keep the rifle on safe. We're going to loosen that screw. Now, I'm holding the trigger forward. As you can see, there's a little bit of slop in this trigger, even on safe, so I'm just going to hold it forward to alleviate any movement of the trigger. I'm going to pull this out, and I'm going to grab the washer, and I'm going to set them off to the side. Okay, now that tension is released from your linkage, you can either use a flathead screwdriver, an Allen, or needle nose pliers, and you can just start moving that to the rear. Once that is rearward, you're going to look inside of your mag well. You're going to very carefully grab your linkage, pull it rearward, very carefully and gently. There's going to be some binding on the linkage due to the tight fitment of the polymer in the trigger, and that is completely fine and normal. So once it's out far enough, you can reach in here with your fingers, finish pulling the linkage out, and remove it from the rear of the stock. Note the orientation of the linkage on a NATO. The arm that engages the trigger pack is facing the ejection port. The arm on the other side is cut off for the NATO because of the NATO mag release. This is one of the older NATOs without the bolt release, but as far as I'm aware, it is the same. For standard or waffle stocks, the linkage is complete on both ends, so it doesn't make a difference. So set that off to the side as well. Put your Allen off to the side, and simply push up and forward. Pull your trigger out. Do note, make sure that you do not lose this if you ever want to convert back to the factory trigger due to a failure or a damage or for whatever reason. Maybe you're going to sell your stock and you want to keep the ARID trigger and throw it into a new stock. This washer is, or this threaded insert is what allows the screw to clamp onto the linkage that has the threads. Now, you are simply going to push the safety either direction. It does not matter. Push that out, grab it, wiggle it out, and take note of that little detent. You see it moving right there? That detent is what keeps the safety in place. This little spring clip. All right, your stock is now completely disassembled. You can skip ahead. I will leave a timestamp in the video, but I'm about to go over what may need adjusting as far as fitment in the stock for one of our triggers. Okay, so depending on, and here I'll use my personal stock as an example, depending on the stock tolerances of your specific stock paired with our trigger, some fitment and adjustment may be required, and that is due to these being hand finished. You know, there can be some type of tightness between the trigger pocket and our trigger. On my trigger, for example, you can see a lot of the Cerakote is worn off right here. That's spray paint, but you can see that shininess. Cerakote's worn off there, and here a little bit in the front as well. This is due to this portion being a little bit tighter, and so you can simply slide your trigger in and either use feeler gauges or wiggle it back and forth, or once it's fully assembled, dry fire it a little bit, and then check for adjustments. I simply just threw my trigger in there, made the adjustments that were necessary to the system, and I let it work itself in. These are good indicators. This trigger probably has close to 7,000 or 8,000 rounds, maybe 10,000 at most. Before this trigger, I was using one of our 3D printed prototypes for a long time because we had more trigger orders that were required to be fulfilled, and I didn't feel like it was necessary for me to get one as long as my 3D print was still working. So that only has, between 7 and 10,000, we'll say. So this area right here might need a little bit of fitment, and then inside of here is always an area to look out for. Now, AUG stocks are way more expensive than our triggers are, and sometimes they're hard to come by. So if you guys want to use either sandpaper, a Dremel, power file, a regular file, all those things are acceptable. And if you want to make the removal of material on our triggers, take that Cerakote down, maybe a little bit of the aluminum has to be removed, that's completely fine. That will not void your warranty. There's no issue with doing that. And we prefer for you guys to feel comfortable, making alterations to the coating or, any of the fitment on our trigger versus your stock, right? This is easily replaceable for the most part versus this. Always make minor adjustments. Do not make large adjustments because you can always remove more material. You can't really put material back. So that's pretty much fitment for the trigger. As far as the safety goes, that should fit perfectly fine. The only thing to note is that sometimes the safety might feel a little gritty, and that could just be due to how close the safety pocket is to the rear of your trigger. Simply sitting there and either taking a file here, sandpaper, power file, the same process here, very lightly, it will help alleviate that issue. You can also just sit here and put a movie on and run the safety selector back and forth and work it in and just wear off that Cerakote and let it work itself in. A crossblock safety manually engages the trigger, so it physically locks the trigger in place, and that's why you can feel a little bit of binding or bite there. Now, as far as tuning the linkage goes, on a NATO, it's not necessarily required. As long as you just make sure that the end is perfectly flat and square with no burrs, that's all you really need to do. And do not take too much material from your linkage. On a standard or a waffle stock, what you want to do is make sure that these are perfectly square and even with each other. Use a straight edge and get those cleaned up. Sometimes they wear or they're not perfect from factory, or maybe they have a little bit of a lip on one edge, outer edge, inner edge. So that's always something to look out for too. All right. So once you have everything out, I'm going to show you 2 different ways of tuning the trigger linkage. One is going to use the trigger pack to tune the linkage, which I prefer, and the other is going to be using pliers and feel and a little bit of finesse, which may be easier for some folks who can't use the trigger pack method. I'm going to be reassembling this rifle with a factory trigger and safety, or at least the stock rather. That will help people who aren't upgrading to our trigger and safety and maybe want to disassemble their stock for various reasons: cleaning, maintenance, measurements. Maybe they're into CAD or 3D printing. So it's very easy. So what we're going to do is stand the stock up, and you're going to slide the detent into the safety, making sure that the raised portion is pointing towards the front of the rifle. I'm going to angle the stock a little bit so you guys can see, but you're simply just going to put it in kind of on an angle, and you're going to try to lay it down just like that. That might have been out of frame, and if it was, I apologize, but you're basically just going to drop it in there like that. Safety, you want the red on the left, white on the right, and you want them facing the back of the stock. You're just going to simply slide that in, give it a little wiggle and push, and lock it in there. She's good to go. For the trigger, we're going to simply just drop that straight down. Cool. Now comes the fun part, the linkage. So we're going to take our stock, and it's going to be a little hard to see for you guys, which is understandable. I'm going to try and get this the best I can. It might not be able to focus. I'm going to try to get it to work. All right, so it's going to be very hard for you guys to see, but if you can look through that little window up front, there's a little window in the stock, and I'll add a photo for you guys post-production here. But that window actually has a cutout all the way to the front of the stock, and it allows the trigger linkage to slide into it. I'll touch on that more later when it comes to installing our trigger and why that's important. So we're going to take our NATO linkage. We're going to drop that in. I apologize for bumping the camera. We're going to literally slide that in and forward and just give it a little bit of a push and a wiggle with our finger. Once that is in there, it's in there. Cool. Now I'm going to stop with the linkage halfway or a quarter of the way into the stock. And there's a reason for this. So about here. So this is the plier method of tuning your linkage, right? So I want you to notice that the linkage has like a snout, basically. That snout slides into this window in the front. Okay, so we're going to push that all the way forward as far as we can with our fingers. And actually, I might even have to use pliers for this, so I'm going to reach into the mag well. And I'm going to push that linkage all the way forward. Okay, all the way forward. Cool. Notice how the flats are very far forward, and we cannot see that nose anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to take our NATO trigger pack. I'm going to slide it into the stock. I'm going to take our swivel for our sling. I'm going to insert that, lock that trigger pack in place. Cannot come out now. Cool. So I'm going to rotate stock. I'm going to grab my needle nose pliers. I'm going to grab this linkage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the linkage rearward. I'm going to do so very gently and very carefully. And the reason for this is because what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to get this linkage to engage on the sear like this, okay? But we're not trying to have it too far forward, and we're not trying to have it too far back, because what can happen is you can actually preload your sear. You see that? All that travel? You can preload that, and if you go too far, the hammer will drop. So when you're tuning it with the pliers, it's very easy to use the added leverage from the pliers to jam this too far back and either preload the sear like that, or completely drop the hammer on yourself, which then requires the bolt carrier group to reset the trigger. So we're going to try and avoid that. This takes a little bit of finesse with some pliers and a lot of feel and patience. Note that the tight fitment of the linkage paired with the tight fitment of the polymer trigger will result in a lot of drag on the linkage, which makes the linkage very secure with the factory setup, but it does make it harder to accurately gauge the distance of tuning this linkage, and it's very easy to try and fight that resistance and overshoot the linkage and either drop the hammer or preload the sear. So I'm going to take the pliers, and you can wrap these in tape, or you can put tape on here, maybe a little bit piece of leather or cloth. And we're just going to leverage against the stock and very carefully and slowly. So, and make sure your linkage is pressed against this outer wall of the stock. You don't want your linkage in the middle. You want it pressed against this stock. You see that, how much movement that has? This is the proper positioning. You can feel it slide into where the linkage is supposed to sit properly. So we're going to grab this linkage, start going rearward, ever so slightly. Oopsie, so rope free. Okay, and we're good. That's on the sear. So now that that is on the sear, we're going to flip the stock back over. We're going to take our washer. Okay, and we're going to take our fastener. Now, I prefer to use Loctite, and some people may not like to use Loctite, which is completely fine. You can use Vibratite or any other type of locking compound on a fastener. Just make sure that it's easily removable, either yellow or blue, or medium or low yield for these types of fasteners. Do not use red or high yield. And then so what we're going to do is we're going to take a small drop, and you really only need a small drop. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the screw in, we're going to push down and then get it started. And it might be hard with the linkage, so if you need to, you can kind of push down with your Allen and start it, but it's generally preferred to start with your finger. Starting with the tool can cause cross-threading or stripping. Okay, we're going to keep going with our fingers, make sure that it's engaged. It is. So we're going to tighten this down. The factory torque spec on this is between 10 and 12 inch-pounds. So that is about snug and a quarter turn. Now, what we're going to do, I'm going to throw my bull carrier group in here. Ooh, and I'm going to drop things off my workbench. I'm going to throw my receiver in here. Okay. I'm going to charge it, weapon system. Okay, it's clear. Stock is cleared. Okay, I'm going to put it on. I'm going to leave it unsafe. I'm going to pull this trigger. Nothing. Cool. Put it on fire. Trigger's on the wall. Brakes. Cool. Holding the trigger, charging it. I'm going to let go. Check for reset. Safe. Sweet. So that's fully tuned. So the difference between our trigger and the factory trigger, there's quite a few. One, it's internally threaded here versus using a threaded insert. It also has two clamping screws, primary and a secondary, and it also has a ball bearing set screw. The ball bearing is important because its purpose is to help you align that trigger linkage window with the window in the front of the stock. So your linkage is going to sit in your trigger like this, and inside of the stock is a little window. Okay, and so this window allows the snout of the trigger to move forward. Okay, now if this window, for example, say is my fingers, if it's hitting the top or the bottom of it, it can cause drag on the system, right? Versus if it was just in the center, it can move freely. The ball bearing helps alleviate that drag, which is present on most factory AUGs, as well as the ball bearing produces a ton of friction on the front of the trigger. It allows it to glide across the stock, and that's where actually a lot of the performance comes into play. We never expected or built the AUG trigger to reduce the pull weight, and it doesn't on all AUGs do a great job of it, maybe half a pound, but on average we see 1 pound with the standard stock, 2 pounds with the NATO, and that's pretty much due to the Cerakote and the ball bearing. It kills so much drag in the system if properly adjusted that it can reduce weight. Again, your mileage may vary depending on the tolerances in your stock and how you adjust the trigger, but that was never the goal of the trigger. It was a byproduct of the engineering. So installing the safety the same exact way as the factory safety, but it is important to note that with our safety, a couple of things. So if I can get this into focus for you guys, let's see. Okay, cool. Can you guys see that? Let's try to get this into focus. Oh, probably doesn't help that I spray painted over my safety. Is this side any better? Nope, not really. Well, I apologize. But if you're looking on our safety, there's going to be a, there you can see, there's a bullet icon and there's an X. The X is safe, and the bullet icon is fire. When inside of the rifle, you want the bullet pointing upwards when installing it, pointing towards your optics. So this would be the top of the rifle. So this would go into the rifle like this. Okay. Let's see. Yep. And then so we're just literally going to wiggle this and slide this in. Now, the safety is reversible. and that is important to note. So this safety can be reversed by simply just pulling it out and rotating it and having the bullet on the right side, and that is designed for left-handed shooters. So, safety installed for the rifle. Okay, actually popped it out. And the easiest thing to do with adjusting the ball bearing is to drop it into the rifle. Rifle on safe. Thumb holding the trigger in place, and you would take a flashlight and shine it over and into the trigger like this. And then you're going to look into the buttstock of the stock. Okay? And with that flashlight shining into the front here, and you looking into the buttstock, you will be able to see that linkage window, and then you can tell if you have to adjust up or down with the ball bearing. By simply taking the 1/8 Allen in through the top hole, you can adjust the ball bearing. By turning it right, it'll go down, which raises the trigger. Going left retracts the ball bearing, which lowers the trigger. You can make the adjustments while the trigger is inside of the stock, but I always prefer to remove the trigger just in case there's any binding or overhang on the stock and the trigger. You don't want to damage any of the threads, the fastener, or the trigger frame itself by doing so. So we recommend making the adjustments outside of the stock. Okay. These fasteners come with a nylock patch already on them, which is a dry locking compound for threads. If you make a ton of adjustments or you remove all of these fasteners multiple times, that eventually will wear off as seen here, and just simply apply another light coat of Loctite. So, safety is installed the same way that it's supposed to be from the factory. I'm going to drop my trigger in. Cool. Trigger is dropped in. Okay, I'm going to, without any Loctite on it, and if you have the dry nylock patch on it, that's completely fine. Start this by hand. We're going to leave the main screw out. So get that by hand, 2 threads out maybe. On safe, thumb over the trigger. We're going to install the linkage. We're just going to push that in through the rear so it goes into the stock. And we're going to stop about here. Okay? About 1/3 of the way into the trigger, we're going to stop. Now, it is important to note that this arm that you see moving right now, that is your bolt release arm. You want this to be pushed upward so the bolt release arm is down. That will allow the trigger pack to go in properly, and you can actually get interference inserting the linkage if this is up. You don't want to do that, so make sure that is down. So once that linkage, actually my linkage is fitment is pretty loose due to a lot of wear on my rifle. I'm going to slide this back out because it went in just simply by rotating the stock vertical. So with the linkage in the trigger like that, or linkage in the stock like that, 1/3 of the way into the trigger, we're going to take our trigger pack. If you're righty, use your right hand to do this. If you're lefty, use your left hand. Figure out whatever is most comfortable for you. So there's going to be a couple things going on at once, and this is going to ensure that this goes over pretty smoothly. First of all, this is your sear, this is your disconnect, this is your hammer. Hammer springs, sear springs, drop safety, little metal dude right here. And that's what you press to pull the butt pad, sling out, sling swivel, sling pin. And it's your bolt catch. This little arm that was inside the stock grabs onto this little nub, and that's how that works. So we're going to take our hand, we're going to push the sear forward. What we're doing is we're locking the sear forward so it cannot drop the hammer once we start pushing the linkage with it, because the linkage will hit this, and because it's locked solid, you won't have any issues. Now, it is important to note that with our left hand, or whatever hand you is your non-dominant hand, where you feel comfortable doing this, you're going to take your thumb, if you have a standard or a NATO, now with a bolt release, and you're going to push that bolt release up into the stock. Okay, remember, so that way the arm is down. Then we're going to take our fingers and we're going to separate the linkage. So that way, see how if you push one way or the other, it's away? You want to push it so both parts of the linkage are against the stock walls. And this will ensure that the linkage doesn't end up binding on your trigger pack. Okay, so separate that linkage, thumb up on the bolt release. Okay, and now we're going, as you can see, they're both against the thing. They're like, I want to say like guides for the linkage, that's what I'm going to call them. And pushing the linkage or the sear forward, we're going to insert the trigger pack. Okay, I'm going to try and get this all on camera. So as you can see, my linkage is against the trigger pack, and as you see, I'm going to push my right hand forward, this one. I'm going to push this forward while locking this sear forward, and you're going to see that linkage is going to get adjusted. Okay, and it's stopped. So right there, my linkage is stuck against the sear, and it is far forward as it needs to be inside of the trigger to be tightened while still remaining fully in contact with the sear. So I'm going to leave my right hand here, and I'm going to pull my left hand off of the linkage. 1/8 Allen, and all I'm going to do is tighten this until it's snug. Damn, snug. That's it. Now we're going to take our main screw. We're going to take a singular drop of Loctite. That's all you need. Anything more is overkill. We're going to insert that into the trigger. We're going to push down, start those threads by hand. Once they're started by hand, we're going to finish tightening it. Now, if you do not have a fix-a-stick, again, and you're using an Allen, use the long end of the Allen, tighten it down, and a 1/4 turn is all you need to reach about the proper torque. Now, if you have a fix-a-stick, you can get a much more accurate torque rating with their little torque limiter, or torque gauge, I suppose. 1/8 Allen, and we're going to tighten this. Now, in case you don't know how to use one of these or read one of these, you simply tighten the fastener, and I'm going to have to remove it multiple times, just that way you guys can keep it in frame and see it. But as we tighten it, that line's going to move. We're at 15 inch-pounds, and that is all that needs. Now, as you can see, these white marks in here are my witness marks from the last time I installed this. It's pretty repeatable. You know, this is perfectly good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this front grub screw, since that rear screw is torqued. I'm going to add torque to this. This front grub screw is a secondary clamping screw, and it is not necessary to torque this as high as the rear screw. I used to torque it that high, but I found out that it is completely unnecessary. After speaking with Martin, he told me that it was originally designed for less than 1 inch-pound. So we are going to literally, or about 8 inch-pound. We're going to tighten this just until that line breaks off that 0. That's all we need. Cool. So now your trigger screws are fully torqued. As you can tell, I also put a witness mark inside of my trigger, and on my linkage, I have a witness mark on the front grub screw in the trigger housing and the rear screw. Now, we're going to reassemble this standard stock. This is going to be done. Put a sling stud in. Nope, put it in the correct way. All right, so weapon is clear. We are on safe. No movement. Put it on fire. And that's fully tuned. So that is how you properly tune a trigger linkage, as well as install our trigger and safety.